r/NuclearRevenge. Includes the entire 3-part story. Part 1. My personal crusade against the men who destroyed the person I could have become. Before the story, I want to let you know this is a hard story to read, and it's a hard story to believe, so I get it if you don't believe this story. Also, I did not get back the part of me that was stolen. So this is a story of what made me the sociopath that some of you are familiar with through reading my multiple nuclear revenge stories. It is a long story about my early childhood, some of which I remember and some I was told by my older sister and mother. Then my revenge against the people who were responsible. I have been debating whether or not to post this due to the criminal behavior, and it is also a hard story to read, but I've had some interesting experiences with the aftermath of posts that I've made here. So let's get to it. I had a horrible childhood with no father around, and my mother left me alone for most of my childhood. Around the time I was 6, my mother started dating a man we will call Tom, short of stepfather, and Tom had a son that was 10 years older than me. We will call him Jerry, short for stepbrother. At first everything was fine until they were married and we moved into a house together. It started with my mom and Tom arguing almost every day, and after every argument, when I was alone with Tom, he would tell me how much of a bitch my mom was, and this progressed to beating the shit out of me, then tell me that if I said anything he would kill me and my mother. So every black eye, every bruise, and once he broke my right elbow were all explained away with clumsiness and fights at school. He would always say in passing, "Don't take any wooden nickels, this will become relevant later." This went on for years. Until one day that I completely blocked out of my memory, and my older sister had told me this part. My mom had said that she was going to leave Tom this particular morning. So when I got home from school that afternoon, this is the scene my sister came home to. I was sitting on the couch motionless with a completely blank face, while Tom had a gun pressed to my forehead. My mom, who was coming in right behind my sister, was frantically trying to talk him down from, well, killing me. We got away from him eventually, and that's what Tom had done to me. But to be completely honest, it wasn't the worst part about my childhood. I'm going to keep this part short. There is no reason to get into specific with this part of my life. As I said, Tom had a son 10 years older than me. Jerry was a pedophile. And how do I know this? Well, there's no easy way to say this though. Jerry started molesting me when I was 7 almost every time he had stayed at our house. Obviously he lived with his mother. He'd sneak into my room, and you get the idea. I of course dissolved all of what made me feel. Fun fact about Jerry is he was really active in his church and was on his way to becoming a pastor, but he became a teacher instead. So let's jump ahead about 10 years. At this point I'm on every substance known I've been in and out of halfway houses and being homeless and living in my car. It had been a long time since I have even thought about Tom and Jerry, till I was at a park across the street from a governmental office that handles stuff like welfare and other things in that vein, when I see a big white truck with the name of Tom's company on the side. He owned a small general contracting company, so I took off after it on foot, and sure enough it was him, obviously picking up day laborers just like he used to do when I was a kid. Suddenly, like a dam broke in my brain. Everything I lived through, everything Tom and Jerry had done to me came rushing into focus in my mind, and I felt rage, and my path became clear. I was going to destroy Tom and Jerry. My revenge. I will be tweaking the timeline, some of the injuries, and some of the dialogue to keep anonymous, and who knows, maybe I've made it all up. Part 1. Tom. I'll start this with saying, isn't the internet great? I wrote down his phone number off the side of his truck. I immediately found where he lived, and it just so happened to be the same shithole house where all of my nightmares take place. I'll spare you the tedious details of stalking Tom and casing Tom's house. So as a kid I spent a lot of time in that house. I knew everything there was to know about it, and to my delight Tom had done absolutely nothing to the home in the whole 10 years since I lived there. So while following him, he led me right to the home of my second target, and I can't tell you how many hours I put into my logbook of both Tom and Jerry's routine. The night I was waiting for had arrived. I broke into his house. Not the first time I did. I made sure to find his gun and to make sure that he had no other weapons at his disposal. He had passed out drunk on the couch, the same fucking one he had when I lived there. So I walked through the home making sure that there were no possible way for us to be interrupted. The stage was set. I pulled up a chair, and this is some of what followed. For obvious reasons I'm not going to post what was actually said, but you can rest assured that you will have the meat of my fun little play. Side note, the house is in an area right called Urban Desert and the area is really bad off. You can hear gunfire every night and sirens all night long. It's been like that since I was a kid, and it has gotten worse. In Tom's living room, me sitting on a dining room chair pulled up in front of his couch. I'm holding up Tom's gun fully loaded pointed at his forehead. I slap Tom, he sits up rubbing the side of his face, looks up at me and jumps. Tom, what are? I hit him with the butt of his gun. This is important, remember I have his gun. Me, shoving a balled up sock in his mouth. Me, you are only going to talk when I ask you to talk, and when you do, you are going to talk in a regular tone. If you yell, you might not see tomorrow. Do you understand? Tom nods yes. Me, take the gag out. Tom does what he's told. Wah. Me, punches him in the ribs. I didn't say you could talk, but I'm going to let you ask me 3 questions. Okay, go ahead. Tom, what are you doing here? Me, this, hits him again in the same spot. Tom, if you want money, I don't have any. Me, hits him in the face. That wasn't a question and I know. Tom, you have no money. That's not why I'm here. Go ahead, ask me a question. Tom, what do you want? Me, for you to be in pain. Of course, and you know that you deserve it. Now stand up. Tom starts crying and slowly getting to his feet. Side note, when I was a kid he looked massive and always scared me, even when he wasn't being abusive, but now I tower over him by 8 inches and outweigh him by at least 80 pounds. Me, getting darker. Why are you crying like a little bitch? Then I slap Tom again. Do you think that I'm going to kill you? Tom nods yes. Me, well, I haven't decided whether or not to end your life yet. Then I started with the real beating. I burst one of his eardrums, broke his nose, his arm and elbow, and this was a somewhat long process. It could have been 2 or 3 hours. Me, well Tom, I'm going to be leaving now, and if you call the police in less than 6 hours, I'm going to kill your son Jerry. Then I told him everything that I know about Jerry, from his address to his workplace, Jerry's fiance's name, and even Jerry's mom's name. Me, remember, don't take any wooden nickels. Then I hit him as hard as I could and knocked him out, and then slipped out the same way I came in. This is the end of part 1, and if you think this is bad, remember physical wounds can heal. What I do to Jerry is life destroying without actually killing him. Edit, I was wearing clothing that covered my identity completely. I thought that it was a given. Edit, I was just told by the people who run this sub that I couldn't use acronyms, so I had to change the names. Sorry. Part 2 is up. Edit, I recently did some snooping and found out that Tom died of a heart attack about a year ago. Jerry is out of prison and is now living in Tom's house, and I really appreciate the fact that I know where he lives and who he's dating. My personal crusade against the men that destroyed the person I could have become. Part 2, if you have not read part 1 this won't make sense. Jerry's turn. So in part 1, Jerry was my stepbrother who is 10 years older than me and started molesting me when I was 7. Well, this is the part where I destroyed his life, like he and his father destroyed my childhood. So at this point I've completed my revenge against Tom, Jerry's dad, and I've completely tracked everything Jerry does and everything Jerry is involved in. So what did I want to take from Jerry? I wrote a list, other than just life gone. His job. As I said, he became a teacher at an elementary school, and in my opinion, that needed to end. His relationships. At that point in my life I haven't had any resemblance of what a real relationship is in my life. His reputation with his family and his church. His physical ability. I needed to show him that I was now able to destroy him with very little effort. His freedom. He has locked me in a cage that has no key. First, his job. I made an anonymous phone call to the school he worked at, posing as an older brother of a student in his class, and said a few things that I had researched. Now of course a random phone call isn't going to get him fired, so I'll let this one go for the time being. Second, his relationships. This was in the form of a letter left on Jerry's fiance's car with the truth and an idea for her to not just take my word for it and go on his PC at home. Now if you know absolutely anything about pedos, you know that they always keep incriminating evidence in their shit. Well, I don't know what she found, but Jerry was staying at Tom's house less than a week after the note. Well, the final part of my revenge came only a few days after those 2 parts. So as you might expect, I had been following Jerry for a while now, and he used to go out with a few friends from his church to the same bar almost every weekend. So now was my time to show him my face for the first time in over a decade. Except this time I stood face to face with Jerry. I was no longer a small child. So I waited for the perfect night, a night that had a large number of people from his church, and he had enough to drink to get a DUI. I did not want him to be so drunk that he wouldn't be able to put up a good fight. Here we go. Me, walking into the bar and staring at Jerry until he noticed me. I could tell that he had no clue who I was. I started talking aloud enough to be heard clearly by him and his friends. Me, hi Jerry. I used his full name. How have you been? Jerry, do I know you? Me, yes. Yes you do. How could you forget about your little stepbrother, the one that you raped over and over again when I was 7 years old? How about we have a talk outside, just the 2 of us, or we can talk about how you're a pedophile in here in front of all your friends. I turn around and walk outside, and the fucking idiot actually followed me. TBH, I thought it was going to be harder than that to get him outside. I did not let him say one word. As soon as we were out back of the bar, I started dealing damage to Jerry, and he had no chance against me. I beat him soundly. Then when his friends came out, I told them everything Jerry was and everything Jerry's dad Tom was, and who I was, and as if my luck wasn't good enough, one of the men that was there remembered me from when I was forced to go to church with Jerry, and I was believed for the first time in my life. Someone believed me. Jerry, once he had gained his composure, which took a while, jumped into his car and started the 45-minute drive to his dad's house. Then I made a phone call to the police and said that there was a man driving under the influence and gave them his license plate number. Let me guess, you all think, wow, ghosts a DUI, that's it. No dear readers, it's not just a DUI. Jerry just happened to be in possession of a stolen firearm that was stolen during a terrible B&E just a few weeks before that put one man in the hospital for 2 or 3 weeks. Good night. Edit. So I have had the question, is there a part 3? Well, yes there is, and I'll be posting it sometime before Monday night. My personal crusade against the men that destroyed the person I could have become. Part 3. Well, this is the final part of this long story. I will say that I don't do very much in this last part. I mostly just observed very closely and made a few phone calls. Oh, and one B&E. So at the end of part 2, Jerry was getting arrested for a DUI and in possession of a stolen firearm. Well, Jerry was in county lockup. Side note, so you might be aware of the fact that I had a pretty serious drug habit. I made most of my money in those days by the buying and selling of drugs, and because of that, I had a few acquaintances in the same jail, and for just a few bucks to be put on some of their books, I was made aware of all of Jerry's info. So it turned out that Jerry had a pretty solid alibi for the night of the B&E at Tom's house, and all he was going to be charged with is the DUI and possession of a stolen firearm. At first, I'm not done yet. I watched Jerry's house closely. In less than a week after his arrest, his ex-fiancée moved out of Jerry's house. So since nobody's home, I gained access to it. The first thing I found was a note to Jerry from his ex. It was a long note with her describing what she had found and how disgusting it was, and calling Jerry every name in the book, also stating that if he tries to contact her at all, that she will go to the police with what she found. Side note, I was absolutely appalled that she wasn't already going to the police. So I went through the whole place and found a few items that would fetch a good amount of money and some money. I found his office and PC and disabled the screensaver and sleep mode, and then found an image, opened it, and left it on screen. I wish I didn't have to see the image, it gave me terrible flashbacks, but it was necessary for my plan. Then I left a note behind right next to the one left by Jerry's ex. Then left, and when I was a safe distance from the house, I made a phone call to the police. I told them that I think someone has broken into my neighbor's house, Jerry's house. This is what was on the note that I left behind. Of course, for anonymity's sake, it's not exactly what I wrote. Dear police, I'm the person who called in the tip. I did this because of horrifying things I found on the PC in the office. I left it open on the desktop, so you don't have to even touch it. From the thief. So about a week later, I received word that Jerry was moved into protective custody after he gets out of the hospital. He got shanked by his cellmate, who I assume was trying to make his bones, and I hope that he did, because Jerry had been talking openly about his new charges that were a DUI, possession of a stolen firearm, possession of child porn and rape. This is pure conjecture, but I assume that he had a video of himself on his PC. It took about 18 months for the trial to be done, and he was convicted of all charges and received 15 years. So that's the whole story. Am I done? Well, I don't know. Jerry should be getting out in a few years. Maybe I'll pay him a little visit. But maybe I made this whole thing up. Who knows?